Perfect. So, Shannon, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate you coming and speaking with us. And we just want to hear a little bit about your story, your past, and what you're doing today.
Awesome. I always have to try to remember to unmute myself. I'm Shannon Foley Martinez. I am 46. I'm about to be 47 in a few weeks. And I have 8 kids from age 23 all the way down to 5. I spent from about 15 years old through just about 20 years old as a neo-Nazi white power skinhead, as a violent white supremacist. And since my oldest son was born 23 years ago, my life has really been steeped and centered around understanding like how I got there and why I got to there in the first place, and what it takes to cultivate human beings who will never look to hate or violence as a viable expression of anything going on in their lives. Because when I became a mom, I knew that I didn't want to parent my kids the way that I had been parented, and just that I never wanted them to grow up and be like me. I didn't really have like any other skill set. I had never even like changed a diaper or anything, but I knew those 2 things. So the most of my adulthood has been spent really grappling with the idea of like, how do you prevent human beings from becoming people who embrace like targeted identity, violence and hatred and stuff. So I'll try I'll do very brief, and then like if there are questions, then everything is on the table. Like all questions that you might have are okay to ask me. I'm a complete open book. So please feel free to ask questions. But I'll do a very, very brief version of my story, so that we have more time together. And there is a Yes magazine article that I was like the cover story for, that goes more in depth about my journey. But you're also welcome to like ask clarifying questions here too. That when I grew up, I like from the outside, everything looks awesome in my family. That we looked like the very typical white middle class, upwardly mobile family. I have a brother who's 2.5 years older than me. My parents are still married. They've been married for 52 years. There was no drug or alcohol abuse in my family. There was no overt like physical abuse or anything that happens. Like I grew up, I essentially grew up on the set of Stranger Things, but like without the Demogorgons. Like, no, you could like ride your bikes everywhere. Like your parents were around, but they weren't like really overly involved. Like my kids were like, how did they like have her in their basement and the parents didn't know? I was like, dude, I totally get it. Like we totally could have done that when I was a kid, because it's like our parents were like just kind of, they were around, but they weren't like overly involved in like our day-to-day stuff. But I was involved in athletics, and I was in gifted classes in school. My brother would grow up to be valedictorian of his high school class, and he would end up graduating magna cum laude from the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown. So from the outside, everything looks like, okay, like this is a really great family. But on the inside of my family, it was like steeped in dysfunction. I would grow up and know that what was happening in the dynamics in my family is like there was like lots of codependency, that even though my parents weren't substance abusers or addicts, that they both came from families where addiction was part of their family dynamics. That I grew up feeling like my earliest memories, I felt like I didn't really belong in my family. I felt like I was the black sheep in my family. I felt like I was born asking why. Like I wanted to know why things fit together. Like, why do I have to do homework if I can get A's on all your tests without doing homework? Like, why are the rules what they are? Why do I have to go to bed at 9 if I'm not tired until 10 or whatever. And that was just like, that's just the way that I came wired to be. And that very much like brushed up against my family's values, which were very much like conformity. You don't rock the boat. You just like head down, get good grades, go on and lead this like secure life, or, or whatever. And that was just like not really how I came wired. And then there was also this like dynamic going on in my family where it was like, the rules were changing and the boundaries were changing all the time. So like something like my brother and I would be doing something, something obnoxious and laughing at like 11 o'clock in the morning, that by 6 o'clock at night when the adults were tired, it would suddenly become a punishable offense. Like we would be in trouble, we'd be yelled at, we'd be like sent to our room or whatever. And for someone who always like wanted to know why and how things fit together, like that was very confusing for me. I didn't understand how to negotiate through that. There was also like a very heavy like meritocracy where it was like, I didn't feel unconditionally loved. I felt like love was very tied to performance, particularly performance in like school and compliance. And so it was like the better you did and the better you like complied, the more it felt like you were loved. And so for me, like the way that I was as a little girl, like that for me, like left me feeling very unsafe, like all the time, that if I was hurt or sick and I went to my parents, most of the time their first response would be to like yell at my brother or I, because they felt out of control. So they were just like, well, how many times have we told you not to like climb trees barefoot, or didn't we tell you to like wash your hands, or or whatever. So rather than this like comfort, that their first response was one of like fear and disempowerment, which they expressed like through yelling or whatever. So I felt like I didn't really have this like unconditional positive regard and this like safety of my parents. But when I was young, I played a lot of sports and I had some really close relationships with some of my coaches. So I was like able to like have that in part of my life. And because we grew up on this like Stranger Things set or whatever, it's like I had a lot of friends, and there was like always, if you knocked on enough doors, there was like always somebody to play with pretty much. When I was 11, my dad came home and let us know that we were going to move from where we were living just outside of Philadelphia to southern Michigan, just north of Toledo, Ohio. I was 11 years old. And when I got there, this sense of like not really belonging expanded from being just inside my household out into the greater world, that when I got there, I didn't have the same hair as everyone. I didn't listen to the same music. I didn't wear the same clothes. And in fact, my like Philadelphia accent was so strong that they asked me if I was like from England, that they literally thought I was from like another country because I spoke so differently from all of them. And so I did make some friends, but they had all been friends their whole lives. And so there was this sense now in which I really was like an outsider. Through middle school, I still like played some sports and had some close relationships with like coaches and stuff like that. But when I went to high school, I went to a private high school over the border from where we lived in Michigan in Ohio. And there was a law that if you went to high school in Ohio but didn't live in the state, that you couldn't play high school sports. And so for me, like this was, that was sort of like the last like bastion of where I had positive adult relationships in my life. And so that was gone now. Throughout my time in middle school, I did, like what you do when you're in middle school. You try to like figure out who you are. Who do you choose to be in the world? Like you're grappling with your identity. Like what do you want to keep from your family? What do you want to discard? What do you want to add that's like all your own? And for me, because I felt like such an outsider, I was really drawn to like counterculture. And so it was first through like 1960s anti-war culture, reading like books and literature and watching movies and stuff like that. One of my very first favorite books was the autobiography of Malcolm X. I loved the like revolutionary nature of the ideas and the challenges to authority that were in it. But through this route, I would end up going through like hanging out with like skateboarders and skateboard culture into the punk rock scene. So as I enter into high school, I can't play sports anymore. And by that point, I'm like really, I am going to like punk shows all the time and, doing crazy stuff to my hair and, and dressing, funky and cool and stuff. By the end of my freshman year, at the very end here, like a couple weeks into May, at the end of my freshman year in high school, I went to a party. I lied to my parents about where I was going. I started drinking at the party. And by the end of the night, and please, if you need to like step away for a minute or get support, like please reach out in the chat. If you like, there are definitely content warnings with like sexual assault and violence and racism and things like that with my story. So please put your needs first and reach out if you need further assistance. But by the end of that night, I would be sexually assaulted by two men. And they were white men. People ask that often because they want this to be a very linear story, but descents into like hate and violence are very rarely linear stories. And when I woke up the next morning, I was just like, first I was like, okay, did that really happen? And I was like, yeah. And then my very next thought was like that there was no way that I could tell my parents that that had just happened. Because, my whole childhood up to that point had been like, if I was hurt or sick or, something was wrong, that my parents' first response was to like yell at me for it. And I think there was this protective part of me that knew that I couldn't take the additional trauma of my parents shaming and blaming me for what had just happened, in addition to dealing with the trauma of the sexual assault that I had just endured. So I took all of that trauma just completely unprocessed and just shoved it down because I didn't have any other adults in my life at that point either that I felt like safe enough or close enough to tell. As we know, like unprocessed trauma doesn't dissipate, it festers. And in my case, this festered into like rage, like deep self-hatred. I hated myself. I thought I was so worthless. My body was worthless. I felt like I was really worthless. And the main way that like manifested was through rage that I didn't understand. And I definitely did not have like skills and tools to process in any healthy way. On the periphery of the punk rock scene where I hung out were the white power skinheads, and they were at like every punk rock show. They always got in fights. They always kind of like had each other's backs and stuff. And I really think that this like rage within me resonated with the rage that they displayed, that like I wanted to hurt everything I came in contact with. I wanted to hurt myself, which I did. I wanted to hurt like everyone and everything I came in contact with. And so I started spending more time with these guys. And essentially what happened, and I remember having the explicit thought as a 15-year-old girl that like, well, who's worse than the Nazis? Like, there's nobody lower on the like social ladder. Like, I really needed a place where I could like feel like I had a place to go, but that I didn't have to be any good. Like, I felt so worthless. I needed it to be a place where I didn't need to really feel like I had any personal worth or value to be a part of all of that. And so I started spending more and more time with these guys. And essentially what I was doing, but I didn't know, and we know research tells us that this is how this process happens even now, even though most of these stories begin in an online way at this point. But I was building like a physical echo chamber for myself, that I would, over the next 4 years, that I would live this very like insular, isolated life that was only amongst like other people who were involved in white power stuff. And so it was like, I started listening to white power music and reading some of the zines and stuff. And that as my world became more and more closed, where these were the only people that I spent time with, everything that I was doing was now like being interpreted through this lens. So it's like if I watched a TV show or listened to like a pop song on the radio or whatever, everything was being filtered through this lens of this like white power ideology that I was like immersing myself in. And then that would be normalized inside this echo chamber. So it was like there wasn't really any challenges that were just like, hey, this is ridiculous or whatever. And if there were challenges to it, that there were ready-made defenses. And if anyone has ever engaged with any of these people online, that you know that it's like if you offer some sort of, just like, well, this is ridiculous or whatever, that they often have like very ready-made responses that are like part and parcel of the like echo chamber. And so for me, it was like, I could just dismiss that easily. I didn't even have to engage with it on any sort of like intellectual or emotional level, because I could literally just parrot out these defenses that were like part of the echo chamber and move on, and not even like remotely have to be challenged by counter ideas. Because those ideas became so normalized. Violence was like a part of our day-to-day life. If there was no one else to like fight, or like that we weren't putting out anti-Semitic or racist like flyers or graffitiing or, intimidation or whatever, it's like that there would be infighting. Nearly all of the interpersonal relationships I had while I was in the white power movement were incredibly violent. But I felt really worthless, so that didn't really challenge me. However, there was also, like, as a woman inside this dynamic, that there was this at least lip service where it's just like, white women are this like sacred vessel to bring forth the new white nation, and are the keepers of hearth and home. And I think that there was like an appeal to me, because one of the things I know now is like trauma makes it very difficult for you to like navigate through complexity. So gender roles that were very simplistic and very traditional would, make it much easier for me to be like, okay, this is kind of like my role, or these are the kinds of things that like I can do in this world. And I didn't have to like worry about navigating through complexity. And at the same time, it was like I dated people like before I was like in the movement, but like, I don't know, I was kind of like second tier popular or whatever. But like inside, I basically went out with like the leader of whatever like little local group that I was with. So I had this like adjacency to power inside this group that I did not have outside. I think another part of this allure was that like I felt so deeply disempowered in my life. Like I didn't even have power over my own body, that there was a seduction to people being afraid of me, that like I could walk into a room, any room, and people would be afraid of me. And that was very alluring for somebody who felt very deeply disempowered in her life. Essentially, I was like a real world meme. Like I basically was like a meme. I was like doing things for the purpose of like being offensive and creating and causing a reaction. And for me, like that felt very alluring, because it felt at least like the closest to empowerment that I could probably get. Eventually, when I was about 19 years old, I had been in for about 4.5 years, I didn't really have anywhere to go. I was dating a white power skinhead who was in the Army, so that's like super not a new thing. And he was still in training, and I was, for a brief like a couple of months or whatever, back at my parents' house, living with my parents. And I had like left home for a couple weeks. And when I got back, they were just like, you left home again. You can't stay here anymore, which was fine because we didn't really get along, but I didn't have anywhere else to go. Very luckily, I had met my boyfriend's mom on that 2-week trip away from home. And she said that I could come live with her because he was finishing up his training and I couldn't go live on base with him. So I went from where my parents were living in Georgia to Texas to go live with my boyfriend's mom and her 3 younger sons. And so basically when I walk into that house, number one, I have a place where it's like, I don't have to do anything to belong. I don't have to like prove myself through a willingness to like fight. I don't have to like espouse any ideology. I don't have to like prove, like I have to do dishes sometimes or whatever. Like I don't have to earn my belonging there. my echo chamber is now broken, that I wasn't super well connected with the white power scene where they lived in Texas. And so now what was like a very normalized part of my day-to-day life for 4 years was like not there at all. So there's no more normalizing my worldview, that there's I'm living in this constant state where it's like the values of pluralism and everything were like very much like the values of that household that I was living in. So my echo chamber begins to break up. And it's like, her younger sons were 11 and 9, and we would play like football and Frisbee and go camping and fishing and stuff. And it was kind of like, oh yeah, like this is like what people do. Like my life had been so hyper violent that I was like, I didn't even realize how disconnected I was from like all the things that make life like the best, right? Like wonder and awe and joy and laughter and, working together and playing and, like things like that, where it was any sort of like forward looking like hopes or whatever. It's like, I was so disconnected from that it was like this, like, oh yeah, like this is like what people do. Like, this is what a life is like. And so it was in that environment where I began to like really grapple with like, is this really who I am? Is this really what I want do I want hate and violence to be like my legacy? Is this really what I want? Do I really want to like die for this? Do I even really deeply believe this? It was over a period of about 4 or 5 months where there was this process of like disaffiliation, where it was just like, okay, like this is not who I want to be. This is not what I want to do with my life. And so I would disengage from this like ideology, but I was still very much like a mess. Like I still had all this like unprocessed trauma. I had this like developmental trauma of like growing up in the dysfunctional household I grew up in. I had this acute trauma of sexual assault that was like completely unprocessed. And so much so that it wouldn't be until my oldest son was born, when I was like 23 years old, that I would even frame that as sexual assault. That for like almost 10 years, the story I told myself was just like, oh yeah, I lost my virginity to 2 men at a party when I was 14 years old. So it would take another like 10 years to even begin the process of dealing with that trauma. So even though I had left and discarded this ideology, that there were, these intervening about 3 years where it was just like my interpersonal relationships were still a mess. I didn't have better skills and tools for like healthy relationships. That was very slow healing. And in fact, it continues on to, through present day, that I continue to grapple with, the ways that trauma impacts my life, and through just like ongoing amends making that I feel like is an integral part of my life, and a dedication to dismantling white supremacy in all of its forms, and my continued self-examination as a white person in America of my own relationship and perpetuation of white supremacy. And so I will stop there so we have time for more questions, but hopefully that gives like some good background on how I got there, and the basic story of how I left.
Thank you so much, Shannon. I think I've heard your story before, and every time I'm so surprised, taken aback, and it really helps me reflect on our society right now, the influences that we have, the way that trauma works within young people, and the places that it can take us. And so if anybody has any questions for Shannon in the chat, please go ahead. If any of our panelists have any questions, please feel free to unmute, ask anything. I have a few prepared here, but I want to just leave the floor open for anybody else.
Well, and I should say too that like some of the work that I do now is like I help people, I mentor people as they leave these spaces. I try to like disrupt some of these spaces and like move people out of them. And I work trying to build meaningful prevention programs, trying to again, like disrupt the recruitment and the pipelines in. So answers to questions, and definitely some of the insight that I have about my own story comes from these other stories as well, and my experience, like as as a mentor, like helping people leave these spaces too.
Okay, I think we have a couple of questions in the chat here. We can go through. The first one is from Melissa, my mom.
Hi, Mom.
What was it that helped you shift out of this space of white supremacy and these extreme ideologies?
So I think what was happening, and part of sort of the model that I use as I'm mentoring people leaving, is that my very broken and twisted need set, like I really, like I was having at least the illusion of these needs being met, or that there was like compensation there for them not being met inside the like white power world that I was living in, where it was like I really needed a place where I felt like I belonged. I needed a place where I felt like I belonged, but I didn't necessarily have to have any personal value. It was like adopting this like, hey, I have worth and value just because of this external like structure of race or whatever, like that. It's like I could just attach value to that, or value to like what I could do for the movement. It's like I needed a place to belong. I needed a place to belong where I didn't really have to be very good. I was looking for some sort of sense of empowerment that I felt like I got through this like fear and intimidation that I was part of. I needed a place where it was like I felt like I could exercise like some agency in my life. And when I was living with this family, that my needs were actually genuinely being met. Like I genuinely had a place that I belonged to, that I didn't have to earn. That there was genuine connection. Like I had people there who did see me, and they did hear me, and they did love me, and they did make me feel like the love that I had to give was like something that was of value. I did begin to feel a connection to something greater than myself. And so I think that it was this, inside this family where I was living, was that my need set was beginning to be like genuinely met, rather than just this illusion or these like coping mechanisms for those needs like not being met.
Great, thank you so much. I think we have a lot of questions. Awesome.
I love questions.
Our next one is from Gracie. What was the hardest part of leaving the white supremacist community?
I was very lucky in that I had moved from where I had been living to like a new place, and I wasn't super well connected. So I didn't feel any like physical threat, like immediate physical threat. And so like I didn't have to worry about establishing security for myself in terms of leaving. I think for me, the hardest part was just like it's like a couple years of like void. And this is a very common experience for people who leave like targeted identity and violence and like hate-based worldviews and stuff, that if they don't just attach to something else where, it's like a new extremism, even if it isn't as like pro-socially bad or whatever, like if it's like more pro-socially good, but it still is like an extremism or whatever, or it's just like, that they go from being like super far right to like super far left or whatever. It's like, okay, well, you have just like attached to this new thing that's like interacting with your trauma or whatever. And I didn't do that. In fact, like I knew that like I needed to not really associate with anyone, even if they weren't like necessarily part of like the white power movement. I knew somehow instinctually like I needed to just like not be around anyone that I really like knew before that. And so there were parts where I was just like very, very, very lonely, and like I would literally just like drive around at night, and I don't know, like I ended up very luckily, like I ended up at a church one night, and because they had like a volleyball court behind the church. And so I was like by myself, and I was like, oh, I'm going to go sit in the sand and like look at the stars or whatever. And then these people rolled up to like actually play volleyball, and they're like, what are you doing? And I was just like, oh, I'm just sitting here. And I was just like, oh, you guys are going to play. Can I play? And they were just kind of like, you're just weirdo sitting in the sand. But I had like played volleyball. I was a setter. And so they were like, yeah, I guess you can play. And then I was like really good. So they were like, oh, dude, do you want to play with us like all the time? Like we play all. I was like, yeah. So I got to like actually like make some friends. But I mean, I was literally so lonely that like what I was doing on a Friday night was like sitting behind a church playing in the sandbox, essentially. So I spent like a lot of time being alone. And I think too, just it's been a very, very like multi-decade experience trying to like, self-forgiveness of feeling the shame that I felt, like coming to genuine terms with like, these weren't just ideas, that I did like cause actual hurt and harm to other human beings, and feeling that shame and processing that. And not trying to like diminish that or just be like, yeah, well, whatever, that I think that those have been the hardest things for me.
For sure. I think those things are definitely like unimaginable for somebody like me, and it's great that we have you here that can talk about it and help bring some light. We have another question here from Allie. How do you feel today when or if you see people adopting white supremacist values, especially kids or teenagers?
So I mean, for me, it's heartbreaking because I know for sure that there is a story behind that story, right? Like, and I know that story absolutely involves multitudinous layers of trauma. And so for me, like that is heartbreaking. It is also heartbreaking because what I didn't realize is that not only was I dehumanizing others, but that in the process of dehumanizing others, I had also dehumanized myself. That my empathy was like completely turned inward, because I used to wonder, like, did I just become like, did I have like a sociopic break? Like, what happened to my empathy? Because I was a highly empathetic child, and I'm a very highly empathetic person now. So I'm like, well, what happened for those 5 years? And I realized that like is like a self-protective type of measure, where it was like my empathy was completely turned inward and directed only at myself, the very immediate people that were like part of my in-group, and by further extension, sort of like the white race. So there was this very inward focused, like empathetic bubble that I existed in. But I think that empathy and this ability to just like have this connection with other people, where we are able to have compassion for the suffering and the lived experiences of other people, that's actually like what makes us human, that is like the immersion of and the deepest expression of what it means to be human, and the interconnectedness that we all have. And it would take me like much longer to just be like, okay, yeah, like I wasn't just dehumanizing others, I also dehumanized myself. And that what my experience was as I like disaffiliated and disengaged and like began to like reintegrate in society was very much like a process of rehumanizing myself as well. And that was like part of the role of this woman who took me into her home, is like she also helped with this process of rehumanizing me. And so for me, it's like, that is really heartbreaking. When I see them, like when I see kids like immersing themselves, that they don't understand that it's like you're doing so much damage to yourself, you so much hurt and harm to other people, and that it's not ever going to meet the needs that you actually have in any way, and in fact is going to like add to it, because now like if you get to a point where you're ready to leave, it's like now you have to like also grapple with this like shame of what you have done or whatever. So everything that you were facing is like now has this whole extra added layer. and I don't know, it's like, I wish that there was like, that they had actual real help and people that would listen to them, and that we had more experience and knowledge of knowing, like, it's not just like really terrible things that create trauma. It's like feeling like you only have worth and value based on your performance, like whether it's in school or extracurriculars or whatever, like that's really trauma inducing. That's like an adverse childhood experience. Being bullied, things like that, like that, those, as they layer on top of each other, it's like it creates all of these very high likelihoods of all kinds of less than optimal outcomes. And, I just wish we were better at recognizing them in the lives of especially, young people, so that we could address them, like, rather than having all of that just have to fester, and be expressed in both externally destructive to others and internally to ourselves ways.
For sure. And I think that actually leads into another question in the chat, which is, what can teens do to support a friend if they see this happening to a friend or someone close around them?
So, and this is something that I, over the end of this year, is part of like my main work that I'm trying to work on, is create some peer-to-peer resources. The first thing I think that you need to do is examine your own boundaries, and what you are willing to engage in. And this is challenging because we're generally not super good at this as a culture. Like, decide what your boundaries are, decide what you will and won't accept in conversation, decide what you are willing to talk about and what you are not, and be really honest with yourself about those boundaries, and work really hard on being clearly communicative to your friend about those boundaries, and just enforce them. So if you are just like, I want to hang out with you, but I don't want to talk about politics at all, like, you have to like know that that's your boundary, communicate it, and then enforce it. Just be like, okay, well, I said I don't want to talk about politics, so I'm going to go. I think it is really important to stay in touch with your friends, but to be somebody that is this reminder of this like out of echo chamber experience, right? So it's like, oh, dude, I just saw the funniest like YouTube video. Isn't this hilarious or whatever? Oh, wow, like, dude, the sunrise this morning was amazing, and I like totally thought of you, or whatever. Like, these things that like connect with like wonder and awe and joy and playfulness and, sorrow, and all of these things that I didn't realize that I had set down as like part of my life, that were not part of that echo chamberic living. It's like, if you can continue to be that person, and again, but in a boundaried way, right? That it's like, hey, I'm not going to talk about race, and I don't want to talk about politics at all with you, or whatever your boundary set is. But to maintain contact pretty regularly, so they know like there is somewhere to go to besides what they're inside of. I think that is incredibly, incredibly useful and important. I also think that it is, if you have a trusted adult in your life, to definitely get their support, and let them know that you are, that this is what's happening for you in your life with your friend, and that you are trying to be a support person for them. And if you don't have like a trusted adult in your world, look for some like online resources that there are good, that there are some like, anonymous counselors and, and things like that, where it's like you can like find some support that that's out there, making sure that you are prioritizing your own like mental health, mental well-being, and mental like robustness and emotional skills. That is very crucial. And like, when I am mentoring somebody who is leaving, like, I don't even like, we don't deal with their ideology really at all until like much later. That mostly like, it's like, hey, let's go to the woods and like, let's go hang out and play in the creek. Let's like make sure that you have meaningful work you can engage in. Like, hey, what are you good at? Like, can you, do you draw? Do you write? Can you paint? What did you do like before? Did you, skateboard? Did you ride bikes? Did you, what can I connect you with that is like part of, sort of like your essential identity? Like, what are the things that like really help you to like feel loved and connected and part of, a vibrant part of the world? And so like, I wouldn't even really deal with their ideology other than to say like, I don't want to talk about this. Like, I don't believe that, and I don't want to talk about this. That is pretty much like where I would like leave their ideology. But hopefully that gives like some, at least some basics, but definitely make sure that you have support. And I will also say that if there is an imminent threat of violence, that there's like a specific threat that's like, on a particular day or in the month of June, or that there's a very specific threat, or that they're beginning to like acquire weapons, or something like that, definitely reach out to a trusted adult. Definitely reach out to a school counselor. Make sure somebody hears you. Keep reaching out until somebody hears you, because those types of threats, as they're escalating, and if they are very specified threats, like that is like definitely a law enforcement issue. Somebody just having like white power beliefs and that they're immersing into 8chan or whatever, like, it's problematic and it's self-destructive, and that self-destruction bleeds out to other people. But that's not like a law enforcement issue. But if somebody is beginning to like acquire weapons, or that they are making specific threats, that is like danger, Will Robinson. Like, definitely get an adult involved and be tenacious until an adult listens to you and takes it seriously.
For sure. And I'd assume that these also, like, these kind of guidelines also apply online as well, because that's really where we're seeing a lot of hate nowadays, especially in the COVID world where people aren't really interacting in real life. It's all over these servers and online. And so just staying vigilant for that is also really important.
Yeah. And like, screenshot, report. If there is like a specific threat, then that is, again, like, definitely, get as much information, pull as much information. If it's not somebody that personally, but is like a friend online or whatever, try to pull as much information as you can from their like IP address down to like whatever. And like, if there's like a specific threat, definitely get as much information as you can, so that you can, get that to authorities. If there's a specific, if there's a specific threat. But I mean, that's also your interactions like online, that it's like, it's okay. You can totally walk away. Like, you can own someone by letting them like rage to the void or whatever. Just be like, I'm just super not going to talk to you about this, and walk away. And that is like not like, that is a win. That is like definitely not a lose situation. And yeah, and I think too, like, developing your own skill set in knowing how to identify manipulative content is really, really important. Understanding how ads work and how they manipulate you. Developing your own emotional intelligence, where like, you can look at like nonviolent communication resources and print out lists of emotions. And if you can robustly like gain skills of like, even just being able to name your emotions has like massive therapeutic value. And that if you can do that while you're engaging with online content, where you're like, what is this content like directed? Like, what is it trying to make me feel? What is this connecting with? That there's a organization called Moonshot, and they bought ads, like wellness ads and mental like meditation and mental wellness and mindfulness ads. And that they had like something, it was like an 80% click-through rate in spaces where it's like they were searching for specified like white supremacist, white power search parameters. And so there, it appears to be a very large correlation between the people who are feeling like lonely, alienated, they want somewhere to belong, they don't feel like mentally like robust or whatever, that they're willing to click through these ads or whatever. So if you shift away from the idea that this is really about ideology and think of it that this is actually about feelings and these like deep needs like not being met, that allows you to like look at actually like the heart of the problem, but also to know like that we are all really vulnerable. And if not this, then there's, you know, like there's other messaging out there. There's like accelerationism, where it's just like, hey, the whole world is falling apart, so why don't you be part of the destruction? And, you know, like you can be empowered by being part of the destruction. Or there's eco-fascism, where it's like the idea that humans are the real virus. Like there was a lot of messaging about that like early on in COVID, where it's like lots of memes out there where it's like humans are the real virus or whatever. The world would be better without human beings on it. So that there's all of these other related and interrelated ideas and worldviews and stuff that are out there that we're all really susceptible to. So this idea of like becoming like very well versed in identifying your emotions and naming them, understanding that you're viewing manipulative content, examining what is this hitting in me? Why am I so interested? What am I feeling as I'm looking at this? Can I name that feeling? And developing your own, you know, good communication and emotional skills will put you in a really good place so that you can, number one, help yourself better inoculate yourself from this messaging, but also be a genuine like support system for the people around you.
For sure. And I think that kind of leads into a comment that Emily left in the chat. Emily, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I was just asking about, I know when you were saying your story, what really resonated with me is how you were saying how it was kind of just a way to get power, especially given all of the trauma that had happened in your life. So would you say that a lot of people, I guess, find community within the white supremacy movement because of power and not necessarily because they believe in it?
Yes. So like it's beyond like food, shelter, and clothing. You know, that I believe like people need, like we all have the same essential needs to like to give love and be loved, to feel truly seen and truly heard, and to feel a meaningful connection with something greater than ourselves. And I also think sort of a corollary or like related to that is that that there has to be a sense of agency that we feel in terms of that connection to something greater than ourselves, where it's like we feel like having this meaningful connection to something greater than ourselves, but that also empowers us to make a change in the world. That a lot of people right now, it's like, you know, especially young folks, you know, it's like you're looking at this world and you're just like, I can't even do anything. Like, there's no way that I can even have, like, climate catastrophe is looming. Like, there's, you know, the government doesn't like hear us at all. You know, it's like the president after a president gets impeached for over this or over that or whatever. Like that, there's this sense where it's just like, you don't feel, a lot of people feel like their voice doesn't matter. So it's like, even if they're just like, yeah, like America's a great place or whatever, it's like, but it doesn't really matter because I don't have any power. I don't have any agency connected with that. And so I think really it's like when you think of it in terms of that everyone who amplifies and entrenches themselves in these like worldviews, that those essential needs set that's what's broken. Like that's what it's really about, that there's for whatever reason, they don't feel like they're loved or can give love, you know, like that there are a lot of people in like pardon me, that it's like in like incels, involuntary celibate communities and stuff, where it's just like they feel like they have all this love to give, but nobody wants it, right? So it's not just that they don't feel loved, it's that they feel like they have all this love to give and nowhere to give it. That, you know, it's like that they don't feel seen, they don't feel heard, they don't feel like they have a meaningful connection, and they don't feel like that there's agency, that their life is not connected to any sort of like empowerment through this like greater connection to, you know, to something bigger or whatever. And so if you look at everyone that is involved in like targeted identity and violence-based like worldviews, that stuff that's the broken need set that's really there. Even though it's, you know, full of like hatred and demeaning things and terrible things that they're saying, and those things are not okay. Like it's not okay. But they're not really there for ideology. Like the ideology is really just kind of like what it was that they collided with, that was available, where that needs have began to like be at least again like either met or have the illusion of being met, or was a place where they felt like that there was like compensation for those needs not being met.
Thank you so much. And I think we're almost about time here. So is there any last thing that you'd like to add? Any last advice, words of wisdom?
Well, definitely if you like, you know, it's like if you are going through your day over the next day or two and you're just like, oh, I wish I would have asked, please reach out. You guys have my email address. So direct questions to them and they can like definitely direct them to me. Please don't go with like, questions unanswered. It sometimes takes me a couple days to like get back, but and so if you don't hear from me, please reach out again. Like you're not harassing me, I promise. I love I love reminders, but please don't like go with questions unanswered, or you know, if you have thoughts or whatever. And you know, I guess like we have so many challenges that we face right now, and we are still like really in the infancy of the digital world. And like I tend to think like the internet is totally awesome, and like the amount of creativity and amazing things and the way that power structures are being challenged and stuff through like, wow, it's like you can literally find all of the information of all time like online, and that's pretty amazing. Like, but we're still very much in the infancy of the digital age. You know, and so it's kind of like rough going right now. So I think, you know, again, even though it feels counterintuitive when you're fighting an ideological battle, to work really hard on your own like well-being and self-help and gaining good emotional skills and investigating like nonviolent communication styles and like restorative discipline and justice in the spaces and the, you know, in your classrooms, in the organizations that you might chair or whatever, building and modeling co-empowerment and genuine like equity in the spaces where you are. I think that those things are all really, really important. And for those of us who, you know, are white folk on here, like continuing to like really do the very hard and arduous work of, you know, examining our, you know, relationship with white supremacy, and how we have benefited from it and perpetuate it in, you know, our relationships and continue to like benefit from it, and really just doing that work, and not from like a guilty way or whatever, but it's like, you know, it's like then you can begin the journey of like, oh, as you know better, you do better. And if you are struggling, like please reach out for help. Even if you feel like you don't have any other adults in your life, or that you don't have adults that you feel like you can trust, like there are, you know, amazing, like, you know, even like the suicide helpline that's out there, even if it's not related to suicide, it's somebody to talk to. There are apps out there, you know, wellness apps that you can like chat with people anonymously or whatever. that if you are beginning to compensate for the things that are happening in your life through like self-violence or self-hatred, that those are really good indicators that, you know, like I've told my kids, I'm like, there are definitely secrets that you don't keep, right? And when those secrets have to do with hurt and harm to people, those are secrets we don't keep, and that includes you, right? So if you are carrying the secret of like self-hatred and desire to inflict harm on yourself, like that's a secret not to keep. And if you don't feel like you have anyone else, like you can always reach out to me and I will try to help connect you with like local to you support. So I think that's it.
Thank you so much, Shannon. We really appreciate your time today and coming and speaking with us. This was so great, and I'm glad to have connected with you again. Very lucky to know somebody like you and be able to benefit from your past experiences and the knowledge that you're bringing into our world today. And so if any of our other panelists have anything else to say, I think we're going to sign off. Thank you all attendees for coming and listening. We really appreciate you being here and taking the time out of your asynchronous Wednesday to show up and be a part of this conversation.
Yes, thank you, Shannon. I know this was a really valuable experience for our students and our staff who are on the call. So thank you again for coming in. Thank you, Devon, for organizing this series of webinars. It's been a really wonderful educational experience.
Thank you all so much for having me. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything I can do for y'all. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.